All right, welcome to episode 6 of the We Are Not That Simple YouTube channel podcast. If you enjoy listening to these kinds of conversations, please like, share, and subscribe. I think we're averaging about 70 views per video. I want to see if we can get 100 on this one. So please share, watch, let other people know about it. Today we have Ms. Danielle Tate. Am I pronouncing that
Yes.
right? Okay. Danielle Tate, who has been in the East Garfield Park community for about 18 years. If you are on the East Garfield Park community page, you may have seen her name commenting or posting as she's a regular there. So thank you for joining us, Danielle. So 18 years you've been here.
Yes.
Where were you before that? Because you're not 18, right?
No.
Okay, just check. I don't want to assume anything.
No. Prior to that, I lived in Avondale.
Okay.
I actually grew up between the suburbs and Hyde Park, so I'm actually from the south side.
Okay.
My husband and I were married at East Garfield Park Conservatory.
Oh, wow.
And
who did you choose as your caterer?
Oh my gosh, that's so long ago.
Because my wife and I were going to do East Garfield Park Conservatory, but because it was relatively inexpensive.
Right.
But
Very
they have a preferred vendor list that is not inexpensive.
Our caterer was in Humboldt Park on North Avenue. I don't even know if they're still there, but the food was amazing.
Okay.
Because we had a Caribbean style food, but I don't remember the name of
Okay.
it.
Because the vendor list that they had was the reason that we didn't go with the conservatory.
Well, I'm sure I got married a lot earlier than you did, even though you might want to talk with my mother about writing that check. It was compared to everything else. It was inexpensive and it was beautiful.
Okay. So you're a Southsider. What suburb?
Homewood, Flossmoor area.
Okay. So Homewood, Flossmoor, in the Hyde Park. And your husband?
He grew up on the south side in the Wild Hundreds in Roseland, so he's very far from the west side.
Roseland. I've been learning quite a bit about Roseland. You know, the church that I have, it's in the Christian Reformed Church denomination, and there is a Roseland Christian Reformed Church that my wife has done music with, and so growing up, I didn't know the South Side neighborhoods. I maybe knew of Hyde Park, and then Garfield Park was the South Side to me, even though I grew up in Humboldt Park, which was just north.
Yeah, I don't think I went. I mean, because I went to Whitney Young.
Okay.
And so I didn't know.
So you're smart.
No, I don't know how that happened. Pure luck. But I went to Whitney Young for 2.5 years, and then when that year CPS went on strike my junior year, and I was out for a long time. And at the time, my parents were separated. So my parents separated for 5 years, something like that, and they got back together. Different story, but my dad was like, "We're not playing that game. You can't be out of school this long." And then I moved back out to the suburbs and finished at home at Flossmoor. But I was already familiar with the West Side. I had friends that went to Whitney Young but lived on the West Side. Even though back in the day it was like, if you went to Whitney Young, kind of got harassed by the Marshall Crane kids.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, it's interesting because you lived in the same building with my sister when my nephew Noah was there, and he was going to Whitney Young as well, and he used to get messed with every now and then on his way to school. But back then, Whitney, North Side, Walter Payton, these schools didn't exist. No. So the number 1 and 2 schools in Chicago were Whitney Young and Lane Tech.
Correct.
So, and we're representing that right now because I went to Lane Tech. You went to Whitney Young. What brought you to the West Side?
My husband had zero desire to live on the South Side because before we got married, I was already living in Avondale.
Okay.
So I was living off of Belmont and Spalding.
Okay.
We both worked at the airport at the time. We lived 1 block from the Blue Line, and so it was just easier out of convenience. And we both, and me until recently, I worked at United Airlines for 23 years, whatever. So it was just more convenient to live further north to get to the airport.
Okay.
So, and considering the price, we were comfortable living in the neighborhood. So we just ended up settling here. We were driving around looking for a place to live. And at that time, in Logan Square, literally, we found a couple houses that we liked, but the taxes were kind of crazy. And so this was still just convenient.
Yeah.
And in price and in proximity. So that's why we ended up settling here.
Okay. So that would have, if that 18 years ago, that would have been 2003, if my math is correct.
Yeah, that's right.
So 2003 to 2021, almost 2022. What changes have you noticed in this community over that span of time?
Well, what's crazy is when we first moved here, granted, our condo, because we live in a condo, is the cookie cutter condo that went up everywhere in Chicago at the time. But it was a lot of people that worked for the hospital that lived around us.
Okay.
And a lot of them had arms, or bought. That was everybody was buying a lot of property. So like one guy that lived on our block, he must have owned like 7 condos, all these things. And then when everything started going on with the real estate market, everybody was foreclosing.
Okay. And just to clarify, by arms, you mean adjustable rate mortgages, not firearms.
Yes.
Okay. Sound like I know a lot of people are packing these days, just want to
not guns, but yeah, I'm sorry. I should have been clear about that.
Yeah, so, I understood, but I'm in the real estate industry,
right. So it was so many people were foreclosing that what started to tick up took a crash, So we had a lot of abandoned properties or people swooping in to buy stuff that just didn't care. And then we had a lot of predatory lending. We had a lot of people. I noticed that because people were starting when it started to get better again and people started buying. I knew 2 people on the block that lost their places because somebody came and said, "Hey, I have this great lending," and it might be an elderly person, and then they lost their place. So now they've lost a place that they've lived in for 60 years to craziness, or a couple of people just not paying their taxes, or whatever the case was. And so it was just it's been so up and down. Every time you're like, okay, it's getting great, and then things drop.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people had to move because the rent up here went so high.
Yeah.
And because my mortgage is relatively low, I didn't have a real concept of the rent over here until other people, like I had some friends that lived over here who were renting, and I was like, "You're paying how much? Like that's bonkers." But in comparison to other places in the city, that was reasonable.
It is interesting looking at the rental market, which I didn't always do. I've been looking at it in the past couple years. That over here, the rents are kind of all over the place.
All over the place.
Because
literally, like
on the same block, you'll have a 2-bedroom renting for like $700 from some slumlord, and then on the same block, you'll have another 2-bedroom renting for $1,100.
Right.
And sometimes similar amenities, similar slumlords. And so that's weird because a lot of people ask me that own rentals, what can I get? I was like, well, it depends, because it is kind of all over the place.
Right.
But yeah, that is one thing I always tell people in terms of buying property versus renting is that rents are always going to go up. Like even if you have a crash, which we did have, the rents don't deflate. A lot of times your mortgages go way down because the prices go down, so you can get the low mortgage, but you're never going to get the lower rent. So if you ever want to buy, talk to me. Okay, so to a certain degree, in 2003, I would imagine the neighborhood being a little bit denser.
Yes.
Is that
so? Even though what's crazy is like I always used to be able to get parking on my street. Now I can barely get parking on my street because a couple of places that used to be single-family homes are now multi-units. So we have a lot more places, row homes and things that were purchased on the block that were single-family homes are now apartments. One of my favorite buildings, unfortunately, it was an older couple. The husband died and the wife died, I think, within 2 years of him dying.
Yeah.
They had two grown children. Somebody bought it. It was a single-family home. Now it's like 4 units.
Oh, wow.
Every person in there probably has a car, and so that's continued down the block. So it's hard to get parking, but I feel like maybe just in my mind, maybe because there were so many children before, and now it's more young couples without children or just young people in general. So there's not as many children on the block. So maybe in my mind, it seems like there's less people I see on the street. But there's definitely more cars. A lot of cars.
But I feel like that's just a trend. Everybody's, when we were kids, everybody had a car. But now every adult typically in the family has a car.
Even though there's a lot of like Uber I mean, this is an Uber generation.
Yeah.
But I think on the West Side, not as many people Uber or take. They're either on the train or they're driving.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one thing I've actually loved about living on the West Side is that parking has never really been an issue for me. Although you live on a busier street than
I do.
I
live
do.
on a boulevard, and it's a street where, especially in the morning, because people who drive from like Oak Park, all that kind of stuff, who want to skip 290, shoot straight down my street, straight to downtown. So in the morning, it's super congested. Yeah.
Now, in terms of like, because there's always the issues that I always think on the West Side. Parking has never been a big issue. It's actually one of the things I like. Traffic, I like. Two things that have, I feel like, gotten a little bit crazier now that I don't know that I ever experienced in the same way. One is, to a certain degree, crime. Like, crime was, I feel like when I first moved into the neighborhood, was just different. It was, I knew a lot of the people, and I knew where they lived. Like, I feel like one of the differences I see now is that a lot of the people committing crimes, like, you're new here, or I don't even think you live here.
Right.
And then the second aspect is, like, crazy driving. Which I know on your street is like...
Is bonkers.
Yeah. Now, because what I get from some people is, well, it's always been like that. And I'm like, not like that.
No, it's crazy because, everybody wants to up each other on how long. I've lived here for 30 years and my grandmother... Well, your grandma still lives here. You moved out. I'm still here. So... Yes, things you may have lived here 40 years ago, and and that kind of stuff. People kind of look down on some of the people that are new to the neighborhood and saying, "Well, you don't know it's always been." Well, I don't care if it's always been like that, and maybe I am new to the neighborhood, but my tax money says I have a say in what goes in this neighborhood. My child doesn't know any other neighborhood but East Garfield Park.
Yeah.
And when we first moved, heroin was a huge issue when we first moved. The park was really nice for a while, and then it kind of fell off. And then it was nice, and then it fell off, and then it would get, just totally overrun. I remember like not wanting to walk my dog for a while because there were so many needles, or, not wanting my child to like just walking to the Golden Dome for all the activities. And I'm like making sure she stayed on the sidewalk because there's too many needles in the grass. So, and I remember when the park was taken care of and they had beautiful flowers and the gazebo where all the people with the CBs are. Yeah. There would be music and just random. I remember going to listen to blues bands in the park that would just set up, and it was great. Yeah. And it was people that were local here. So it's not like it was just people coming from outside the community doing stuff. There'd be a dude that used to set up, and as irritating as it was sometimes, but he would set up speakers and they'd have like a party, and there would be no problems about anybody getting shot or whatever. It's a DJ and people having a good time.
And that was the thing where I say that the difference is that a lot of times you knew the people. Right. And because of that, it created a bit
I knew the dealers.
Yeah. And so when we're going to have a party, there's like this place right here, the Lakeside Bar around the corner. When I first moved in, they'd have live blues music on the weekends. Yeah, I went there. And that's not the case anymore. There was actually somebody just shot there last night, and that's like a regular thing. Like maybe every other week somebody's shot right on this corner, and it's like that didn't used to be like that.
What's weird is that I feel like the amount of shootings were the same. I feel like there was more to balance it out. So in my mind, I was like, yeah, 3 people got shot on Lake Street. Also, I had a great time at this. It was strange. And also I noticed the drugs changed. And this is, and I'm trying not to do conspiracy theories, but there was definite, like when they talked about after, oh my God, what's the huge Mexican cartel where the guy just got caught a couple years ago?
Chapo?
Yeah. So supposedly this was the Midwest distribution center for El Chapo.
Okay.
And so, and you can see all kinds of documentaries about how good the heroin and pure and the best heroin was on the west side of Chicago. So there would be people not from this neighborhood come. I used to watch all these expensive cars in the morning when I'd walk my dog trying to buy drugs on the way to work, which used to trip me out. And then the heroin kind of dipped down.
Yeah.
And I even noticed, like, when McDonald's used to be open on Madison over, like, we're on the other side of the park, people stopped selling heroin as much, and it moved to pills.
Okay.
So you could be at, when Citibank was over there, Chase, whatever bank was over there, then there'd people who had their little fanny packs, and it went from trying to sell you heroin to Percocet.
Oh, wow.
While you're, like, trying to buy chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
And so it also changed who the buyers were. Now, granted, there's still lots of heroin to be purchased on the west side, and people like to use the park to their comforting area. But the clientele definitely changed. I think there's not as many people doing heroin in the park. It's still clearly an issue, but I don't know. It's like I could literally, me and my neighbor, we could literally pick out and knew the names of the dealers that were in our area, and we were good about having positive loitering and doing all this stuff, and they knew us too. So we're kind of playing a risky game, but there was a little amount of respect. Like, literally, some guys were like dealing in front of the house. My neighbor called me. She's like, "You got guys?" And I went outside. I was like, "Yo, this is not that block. This is not the gate you're going to be on. This is not the block you're going to be on." And literally, they were gone, and I never saw them again. Yeah. I mean, granted, you're just playing whack-a-mole, and they probably moved to somebody else's block, so I'm sorry if they moved to your block. But there was a little bit of that.
And it's easier when you have a certain kind of on your block, people knowing each other.
Definitely.
I know the one issue that we've had here, especially since COVID, is just, well, there's two dynamics. One is the vacancy, because for a while, even the bar was shut down. And even when it opened up, it's only opened up at night. And then the grocery store was shut down. And then you have some vacant buildings.
Right.
And then you have the Green Line, and you have a men's shelter. And so it's just, well, it's really easy to set up shop here because throughout most of the day, there's no eyes. There's nobody complaining. But anybody that passes through there, it's like, or people that live around the corner. So the one thing that we saw a lot when COVID first started is just multiple people doing the dope fiend lean on the block. You know, they got their drugs over on Lake Street, either went into the park or they were just coming to our street and they're just leaning against the fence or whatever. And, you know, we'll have to call 911, get an ambulance just in case. All kinds of stuff over there. And there's no eyes. And then what happens is once several people started noticing it, then we kind of have to all talk to each other, figure out a strategy. Yeah, and so that's the whole whack-a-mole thing, is they're looking for empty spaces or spaces where they will be tolerated, so to speak.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, sometimes when you complain about it, people are like, "Oh, well, what they need is we need more resources," and we do. In the same manner, there are a lot of resources on the west side that we don't use or that we don't take advantage of. So the resources are here. It's one, getting people to it, but on the flip side of that is, I want you to be able to deal with your addiction. On the other side is that my child walks to school and my child's safety takes precedence over your addiction. And so I'm going to call the police. I'm going to not want you leaning on my fence. I'm going to not want you ODing in my backyard or coming or using, like, you know, cutting through or just wherever. So, you play that game where you're concerned about your neighbors and without sounding like a jerk, most of the people that were coming over ODing and leaning and all that kind of stuff don't live here. Yeah. You know, so I and some of the people who, and unfortunately a lot of people that I knew earlier that did have addiction issues are either dead or I don't know where they are. Yeah. So I care and I want people to get better and I want people to have the resources. I also want to have sanity, peace, mental health in my own home and for my child.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it rings a little bit different when you have family here. Because there are a lot of people that I meet that, and this is not to hate against anybody who's single or doesn't have kids, but it's, you know, how you choose to live your life is how you choose. But it does feel different when you have kids. Like, I grew up on the west side. I moved over here when I was still in college. But it was just like a 1 mile move, which can make a huge difference in the city. Sure, but I grew up with the violence, with shootings regular. That doesn't freak me out. But now that I have kids, young kids, it's like, it doesn't freak me out emotionally, but it freaks me out sometimes intellectually, where I'm thinking, if one stray bullet were to catch one of my kids, nothing would be worth that.
No.
Like, nowhere in my mind would be like, that was the risk that I took, and
Right.
And that's a very different mentality than when I was single or even married without kids, where it's just me, and I'm like, I can handle the danger. Well, get over it,
Right. And what's crazy is that for the people like you and me who lived, and I'm older than you, so I was living in Chicago during the 80s, and it's like people getting shot and all that kind of stuff was just as bad, if not worse, if you look at the murder rates.
Yeah.
But we didn't have social media and all this kind of stuff. So sometimes I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there must have been 4 people shot this weekend by the house. And then I was like, my husband's like, no, it's 4. You read the same story 4 times. So that's not to take away from the violence that's happening.
Yeah.
But I have to be careful about saturating my brain with the same stories over and over again so that it doesn't. But you're right, because my daughter went to Westinghouse. So, she wanted to go to Whitney Young, didn't get in. I was like, I don't know who's going to be driving you to Lane Tech every day. I would have done it. It was really, I think, kind of came down between like Lane Tech, De La Salle, and Lincoln Park. And I was like, all these schools that are so far. Oh my God. And also my child had always been at schools where there wasn't a lot of kids of color. So to me, one, I was familiar with Westinghouse because when they reopened here, she was down going to school at Suter. So they got to visit it and all this kind of stuff. And I watched the school, and she was like, I'll go to Westinghouse. I was like, thank you. Because I'm kind of over driving to Lincoln Park and all these other areas to get you to school.
Yeah.
And on the days you have to go by yourself, it's going to be like an hour-and-a-half trip or whatever.
Yeah.
But her going to school in the morning, sometimes, my mom was like, oh my God, she's going to get shot. And I was like, well, you have a lot of police presence in the morning when she walks to school, because she'd have to walk past, was it Beadler or whatever?
Beidler, yeah.
And stuff. Even though those people underneath the L on Lake and Kedzie made me worry. But I was like, well, it's 5 blocks, and she's going in the morning when there's a million kids. There's kids going to Marshall's, kids going to Beidler, kids going to Westinghouse. So I felt a little better about that. But it's still, you think like, is it worth it?
Yeah. And it's tricky because,
She'd have been on the bus or the train going to Whitney Young, so I don't even know, or going to Lane.
Yeah. And I grew up with my parents not really having much of a choice. Like, this is just the life that we have to live in.
Right.
And so it's weird when, to a certain degree, I might have a little bit more choice. I'm doing a little bit better financially than my parents did at my age. So then what do I choose, And so far I've chosen to stay. But it does affect how I approach the things. Like, when the lockdowns hit, the drug market here on my corner blew up crazy. And I didn't like it. But as somebody who used to teach teenagers, I understood. You can't go to school. You're bored. You probably can't go to work at McDonald's anymore because it's all different, especially right when the first lockdowns first started. You need money. Here's easy money. Here's a bunch of people that are addicts that you don't really care about because they don't live here. I understand, but I can't tolerate it because I can't tolerate the danger to my kids and things like that. And so I know that because if I was single, I probably would have been like, whatever. But being married with kids, having to protect my family and whatnot, it's like, I have to be against you. When I see you doing stuff, I have to call police. Like I have to do what I have to do to make sure this doesn't continue to grow, and even to a certain degree goes away. And it's one of those things. It's not because I hate you. It's not even because I don't understand. Like I just can't have that. I can't allow that danger to continue to be present.
I don't know. I feel zero guilt protecting my child. I say my husband's the same. My husband. So zero. I feel zero guilt. Like I remember talking to one of the neighbors whose son had been arrested. So he's like lives like 3 blocks down, and she was like, everybody was calling. And you guys have these little committees calling everybody, calling the police on everybody's children. And I'm like, but you knew your son was doing this. So you want me to think about the safety and the future of your son having to go get locked up at 26 in California, and you don't have the money to get there. So now he's going to be there, 5-6 months. You can't work during that time. You can't do anything. You don't have the money to get him out while he's waiting for trial. and you want me to think about the future of your son, but you're not thinking about the future of my daughter, who might be walking to school, who might be getting on the train, who's just trying to get to swim practice, or her friends, or my neighbor's children. So I care about your child. I care about that. I want him to have other options. I also care that if my child gets hurt, I will burn this city down.
Yeah, it's
that's my mentality.
I'm not going to sacrifice my child for your child, especially if you won't make the sacrifices yourself. Now, I do understand that it's hard.
Right.
It's hard to keep your kids in check. It was hard for my parents to keep us in check.
We're married and we only have one child, and so I get the struggle. I can't imagine that. Like it blows my mind when I see single parents and your children are in activities and you're paying. Kids nowadays aren't cheap, and I can't imagine if I was single on a lower income, exposing my daughter to all the things he did. Now, granted, I will find every free project. My daughter was in more, especially in this neighborhood. Yeah. My daughter knows she could probably walk around the conservatory blindfolded. Okay, I took her to all kinds of activities at the Golden Dome and everything. There's lots of resources here that people do not take advantage of. However, I still had a partner. I still had help from neighbors, from my parents. My sister used to live less than a mile away. So I make jokes that I had 1.5 kids because either I had her daughter or she had mine. Yeah. So if you don't have that, how hard it would be to be a single parent working 2 jobs, trying to keep a tab on your child. And I get that. And I applaud everything that you do to try to make things positive for your child. However, like you said, the safety of my child takes precedence over everything.
You know, it's interesting because I feel like even though you are older than me, you're not that much older than me comparatively. But when we were growing up, there was this idea, there was this thing that was heavily taught, I feel like, in any school, whether it be public school, private school, that there's certain type of behaviors you need to avoid. And if you don't avoid those behaviors, you're going to end up broke, you're going to end up in prison, or you're going to end up dead. Like, don't do drugs, don't get involved in gangs. These were just the common things. And I feel like, especially in my experience in nonprofit work and in education, they were trying to avoid saying those things. Like, don't do drugs, don't get involved in gangs, or you're going to end up, it was very plain growing up, you're going to end up dead or in jail.
I mean, I still say crackhead. My daughter's like, nobody does crack, wow. And I'm like, but that was our language. You saw
your mama's on crack rock.
I didn't want to say it. But you saw so much devastation from crack that I don't see as many people my age with drug addiction because we just saw such horribleness with it. Even with a lot of the heroin addicts around here, they're usually older than me. Because the people my age, even though I'm starting to see a thing with pills with my age, but and not that one is better than the other, but I think we were so inundated with your mama's on crack rock and you're a crackhead, you're a crack baby, that you're just like, I ain't touching that. Yeah,
and it's like nowadays it's like I've had, when I was a teacher, I had students that were killed, and it was like you would go and there would be, so the problem is yada, yada, yada. And I was like, well, I knew that kid. And the problem was he was involved in this gang and he was dealing over on Walnut. And I caught him a bunch of times. They said, stay away from that. But nobody was saying, you're going to end up dead or in prison. You're going to end up dead or in prison. And then even after it happened, it wasn't like, guys, let this be a warning to you. Don't engage in that. We all loved Antonio. We all loved Johnson. We all loved these. This is where that life leads. But that, I don't, at least when I was working in the schools, that message was not coming across.
You notice too, though, that it's more like with gangs, they were larger. So I don't know. So now it's more, so you might be part of, I don't know. I can't even, because I don't even know the gangs anymore, because it was basically like maybe 10 us growing up. And so, and they had a larger spread. So, now, like, you knew like there's basically 3 gangs in Humboldt Park. There's like 3. And now there's like, maybe it's not even gangs anymore. It's really block by block situation. So you might be, corner street hustlers, but literally 3 blocks over is another group and another group and another group. So now you have so many different groups coming at each other. And, you know, I don't want to buy into this thing like, you know, like, well, Larry Hoover kept people together, you know, all that, y'all still killing each other. But you have a lot more battle because you have a lot more smaller groups. And it's not even like gangs anymore. It's just to name a bunch of dudes on one block or 2 blocks.
And the things that I noticed that will typically have in common is there's gang activity, drug activity, and often cases, not 2 parents. A single parent household. And again, it's understandable as a single mom, which I see that more often than single dads. But as a single parent, regardless, it's hard to keep up. It's harder to give your kids everything to keep them happy as teenagers and not want to pursue this life where they can maybe make some extra money on the side. But I don't even see it to a certain degree being encouraged. It's all to a certain degree making excuses for, like, well, and those excuses are legitimate. Poverty is difficult to overcome.
Right.
Cycles of fatherlessness is difficult to overcome.
No generational wealth, like,
yeah, that's difficult to overcome. But I don't think we ought to stop encouraging the overcoming of
there
it.
has to be balance. You can't just say, okay, there's a spotlight on the problem and not a spotlight on the remedy. So it's like, okay, you don't need to tell me anymore what the problem is. I live here. I know what the problems are. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be spotlighted, but damn it. Sorry. But where's the spotlight on the remedy? Where's the spotlight on what are we going to do? Because everybody's like, well, if we have community centers. Their community centers are great. There are 5,000 of them over here. Or people who are saying they're opening community center and whatever they're doing. But and those are needed. Those are great resources when kids have a place to go. We have to get the kids there. Yeah. We have to get the community buy-in and the parents to buy in, because just being on PTA at Westinghouse or at when my daughter was going to Suter or wherever she's going to school, Alcott, where your niece went. Yeah. You know, so that it has to be a community buy-in for the how do we solve the problem? Because sometimes I get jaded. Even going to I had to step away going to community meetings for a while because everybody's like, well, the alderman's not doing this, and the so-and-so's not doing this, and the so-and-so's not doing this, the church is not doing this. Well, what are you doing? Yeah. Can you sweep in front of your own darn doorstep? Can you, when we're all calling the police to say, hey, this dude needs to get up off the block. Yeah. Well, you call too. So it has to be a certain amount of community buy-in, and that's been like some of the hardest part around here. And
I feel like a lot of that, a big part of it is that it's been politicized. Yes. Because what it sounds like you're saying is personal responsibility. And that sounds way too Republican. Personal responsibility. Yeah. That's what the Republicans say. And we all know that they're evil. So that idea must not have merit. And it's just like, no, there's a lot of crazy Republicans out there. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Personal responsibility, like instead of pointing fingers at everybody, okay, what are the solutions? Right. 2-parent households is a good one. That sounds super conservative. Maybe, but it's still it works. Right.
And that's an investment for the future. And then it's also like, but what do I do now? Because if I'm a single parent, I'm gonna run out and get a spouse. Like, no, that's not the answer. Like, or
now I do wonder about that. And this is, I'm not trying to be crazy, but I do wonder about that. Like, to a certain degree, marriage is hard. Right? Yes. We know marriage is hard. And so when we say,
I don't want to say it that way because my husband's saying.
Well, and I do love my wife. But it is hard. But there are times where realistically, when my wife and I get into the point where we're fighting, where we don't like each other. Right. Where we're like, do we really want to be in this? And I'm pretty confident that's most couples get to that point every now and then. I mean, and a lot of times I'm to blame for it. It's my fault. I'm being a real big jerk at the time. And I'm thinking I want out of this as if I could do better. But there's a net gain there. And so I always wonder to myself, because there are cultures where there are arranged marriages. In our first world country, we're like, that's a terrible thing.
My grandmother's marriage was arranged.
Yeah, and so there are
her first marriage.
there are problems with that, but then there's also some benefits. And like if somebody said, well, I'm going to go out and find a husband just to help me parent this child. Okay, that's not the ideal way to pursue a relationship. But if the alternative, I don't know that it's 100% true that the alternative is better. And this is not me saying that you should just run out and do that. It's more, I don't think we should be afraid to ask the question. And because there's some ladies out there that have like learning disabilities, that have things where economically life is going to be difficult by yourself. And some of them have kids because some guy manipulated at some point. And I'm like, well, what's the hope for them? They're not going to get a great job that can provide for them and their kid ever. Are we going to just keep pushing them to the system? Or is it a good idea for like, hey, I got this guy that I know that I think you guys would be great for. And I wrestle with that because I don't want to just push a young woman on some guy or anything like that. But at the same time, I don't want to push them to the system. So I'm like, well, we can think about the problems all day, but what is the solution?
Well, the thing too is from statistically, I believe, just because my husband, we're NPR nerds.
Okay.
And
I'm sure there's a lot of NPR nerds out there.
NPR nerds and documentaries and, my husband's a podcaster. You got to listen to this. I'm like, I don't even have time to brush my teeth. But, I believe, and don't quote me on this, and one of the other things I was listening to on public access is that statistically people are having less children. Okay. So I do also notice that even when I see young mothers, there's fewer of them. So there's something going on there, but that doesn't change right now because, you might, before you would see a lot of, unfortunately, girls growing up in poverty might have a child when she's young. She might have 3 kids by the time, that she's 25 or something like that. Unfortunately, around here, I would see a lot of kids when, going to Marshall or whatever, and there are a lot of young pregnant girls. I don't see that as much anymore. Not to say it doesn't exist because I don't see it. But I think that's died down a bit. However, that getting caught up in the system becomes difficult.
Because what's the incentive to get out? So this is what we used to talk when
things too cost so much. So it's like, okay, I'm in this system. I'm going to get out. I'm going to do better. Now I have childcare. Okay. As 2 working parents, when my daughter was younger, I wanted to put her in a nice daycare. And, you start looking at all the trendy things. And, oh, you need to put your daughter at so and so. I'm like, oh, I go visit it. I'm like, okay, I would be paying, and my kid's 18. I would be paying at that time $1,300 a month for this fancy child care. I'm like, I'm paying a mortgage payment for my child to sing, row, row, row your boat. I'm not doing that. Not to say that there's no value in young education, but I can't imagine if I was single, that I don't want my kid going to some crazy child care. How would I afford that? So then I get the assistance with child care. So I'm working, but I can't work over so many hours because then they take away the child care assistance. So then you're taking to some random person's home, hoping that nothing happens to them. So it's such a crazy balance.
Yeah, when I was working at Crane, when I was teaching there, and we would talk in the teachers' lounge, a lot of us teachers, and we were all from very different political perspectives. But it was like, all these kids, most of the kids there were on link card and blah, blah. And we would start talking about how we were being paid. Which at that school was decent comparatively, but it still wasn't great. And I was like, one day I pointed out to us, it's weird because we're trying to encourage these kids to bust their humps so they can be in our situation.
Well, I'm not getting a link card. And I'm like...
Yeah, and it's like, to a certain degree, we're almost able to, we have the same buying power as their families do. But we're working our tails off day and night, and we're saying, oh, get off the welfare so that you can work your tails off and be at the same place that we are, which is pretty much the same amount of buying power.
And and you can also drive a car with a Toyota with a bumper that's duct taped to it. You too can have this life.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, we're not really selling it very well.
Right.
And that's the tricky part when I think about the system versus, it's like, I'm glad that it's there to help. But the problem is then you're dependent on it because, you know what, I'm going to work really hard and I'm not going to have anything more. And I actually might have less I can say that it's mine. Once upon a time, that meant something.
Right.
Doesn't mean much to me.
Especially if you're seeing, and that's not to take away, because I think people deserve assistance from time to time. Like during COVID, when it first happened and the airlines were shutting down, everybody's laying off, and people are like, well, I feel bad about taking from the system. I'm like, darn it, I've been working for years and I've been putting money in this system. Yeah. If I have to withdraw on that money, so be it, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, I mean, there's so many. I mean, obviously we're not gonna solve the world's problems, but just in this community, there's a lot of resources to help, but it's some of them are just Band-Aids and not like how not to get the wound in the first place, Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard. Like there's translation issues. Like in the housing, there was a bunch of down payment assistance available for housing. Right. I never got any of it. Part of it was that I didn't know about it, some of them. And part of it was once I didn't understand the mechanisms and the reasons for the accountability structures that people put in by these laws. And so I was like, that's just too much of a headache. I'll just pay for it on my own.
Right.
And I feel like that's pretty common, especially people that grew up in Southwest sides or you grew up poor. It's like, that's just too complicated. I'll figure out a different way. And I don't think the people a lot of times creating these resources understand that dilemma.
Right.
And it's like, so then what they do once they find it out, well, we'll throw more money at it. And so you get to a point where for some of these grants that are like $15,000 towards down payment assistance, that's great. But the city is actually setting aside that $15,000 for that one person, plus the person managing it, plus their supervisor. And it ends up being like $100,000 to get this one person $15,000. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And a lot of nonprofits work that way. So like we talked about, there's all these resources here on the west side. All those resources cost money for the structure. They cost money for the staffing. And I've worked with some of these organizations, both as volunteer. I've worked in nonprofits as an employee, as an interim director. And the amount of resources versus the amount of results being produced, I'm just like, I might as well pay more taxes.
Right.
And that's the other thing, like the amount of tax versus the results. I have this one conversation that somebody lives on Fulton all the time, and he's a very progressive dude, but he's like, I do pay taxes, and for some reason my taxes aren't enough to fill my potholes on my street. He's like, how about you give me a tax break, and I'll go to Home Depot, and
I will fill it for you. You don't even have to, just give me a shovel.
Yeah, and so I always wonder about that aspect of it, because I've become very jaded with nonprofits.
I have too sometimes. I think because over here we saw so many, especially for a while with TIFs, that people getting these monies for these foundations and things, and I never saw them. And so then some people are like, oh, well, I went to one of their banquets or I went to one of their things. And I'm like, yeah, well, okay, I saw the fundraising. I didn't see where the money went. So there's been a lot of things that I will go hard in the paint for. I will go hard in the paint for Breakthrough because I consistently see what they're doing. I've volunteered over there. I see the things that they do. I see what they bring to the community. North Lawndale Christian, I see how they absorb a lot of the community into their projects. They hire from the community. They provide educational assistance, cheaper childcare, senior care, which is a lot of people don't. We're worried about our children, and people don't think about how a lot of people need senior care nowadays. And so, but then other ones I keep seeing pop up on our page or at community events. And I'm like, I have not seen one result of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so then you start like being like, I don't want to hear anything new,
Yeah, and we have so many of the nonprofit stuff, but hardly any for-profit stuff. Like, I mean, a great example, I talked on the previous episode with Ronald about Aldi getting shut down. And it's just like, I've seen a bunch of advertisements for Aldi has left, but we won't leave. And I'm like, to a certain degree, you're useless to me. You can come and pass out food once a week. I don't eat once a week. And I'd rather go shopping for my groceries. And so I applaud your effort. And I don't even I feel like I'm crapping on them, which I am. But they don't deserve that to a certain degree. They're trying to do something good.
Right.
But to a certain degree, we need grocery stores. We need restaurants. We need businesses. We need things like that. And I don't see the efforts towards those things.
Well, there's like a fear of, gentrification. You hear gentrification, everybody panics. And so it's like, as a person who also grew up on the South Side, we had neighborhoods of color with a variety of stores. So it doesn't require outside. We shouldn't have to wait on white people to move into the neighborhood to get what we deserve. Even when one of my neighbors made a joke, she's like, "Don't call, I'll call." Like the police say, they're going to call. They're going to come get to me before they come get to you. Or comments like that. And we're joking, but kind of serious.
Yeah.
So it's like, I shouldn't have to wait for my neighborhood to diversify in order to get the things, because the money's here. Like when Pete's open, and I know some people don't like Pete's. I was excited about Pete's because they carry a lot of things that I like. But you shouldn't have to wait for that to get a Pete's, to get a Mariano's. And we don't need a Mariano's or a Whole Foods to come in. Like Inglewood did get a Whole Foods, and they also have a Whole Foods where the prices are more marketable to the neighborhood that they're in. So you can get a good grocery store with prices that the neighborhood could afford. They will come. However, we shouldn't be scared to think that just because a Whole Foods comes that it's going to divert. Inglewood has not gentrified because they got a Whole Foods.
Well, and what I've heard about Inglewood from a couple people that have watched, because I'm not really involved with Inglewood at all, what I've heard is that the community organizing to make that happen was more on point, in the sense where if you're a grocery store like an Aldi or Whole Foods, there's certain things that drive cost: security, repairing broken windows over and over again, customers coming in and walking past drug, those type of things that,
or like at Pete's, they're losing 50 carts a week or 20 carts a week, and everybody's like, oh my god, how dare they put a quarter? I was upset about the quarter, but how many times were you on Washington or watching somebody go through your alley, pick through your garbage, and they got a Pete's cart?
And those are things that the community can affect. We can say, hey, stop taking the damn, I just said it, carts. Hey, get out of this entrance to the store. Hey, stop busting those windows, or controlling your kids. I know my kids aren't going to be busting any windows.
I don't think so.
And so it's one of those things where those are and that doesn't take money to do. And so for me, when it comes to like the idea of encouraging the community to step up for these, it's not even economic. It's just control yourselves. Be a place where a business
or
wants
control
to be.
what you can control. Like, or even like we used to have block cleanups, and we haven't had one in a long time. But just the block cleanups made a difference when we had a certain guy that was selling on our block all the time. And because we kept being outside, then he just got frustrated. Yeah. And he left. That was free. My elbow grease of picking up was free. My presence outside was free. Yeah. And that made a huge difference on the block. Yeah. So those are things I can control. I can control when I go to Pete's, returning, not running off with the cart. Or taking my money there versus driving all the way to Mariano's in the West Loop, or the Whole Foods in West Loop, or Jewel on Roosevelt, or wherever it is that far. Yeah. Even just going, what's the grocery store on Roosevelt and Homeland?
I don't know. I don't go that far.
Oh, okay. Whatever. It used to be Leamington's. Now it's something else. But and that's a grocery store that's available. I mean, that's far from here. If I didn't have a car, that's a long way to go to get to a grocery store. But just doing the things that I can control and that don't cost any money.
Yeah.
So those things are free.
Yeah, and because like right here, we have 3 grocery stores, and I think all 3 of them are currently shut down. One on Lake in St. Louis, one on Lake in Homan, and one on Walnut in Homan. Like they're all within a block. They're all shut down. One of them, they had some health thing, and they were allowing the drug dealers to be in their store.
I remember.
One, I think they got caught doing a link card scheme where they were charging people and giving them cash for link card stuff. And it's just like some of those stores, I get that their owners are doing what they got to do to try to be profitable. They got caught, and now they're not there anymore.
But they don't live here, so I don't feel bad when your store gets shut down.
But what I feel bad for is the people who
depended on
who want a local store. And it's just like, okay, well, how can we, if there's somebody that's willing to open a store here, I don't necessarily care about them and their family, but I have to care about them enough for them to stay there so I can shop.
Right.
And it's just like, so how do we, because again, it's easy to point a finger at them and all the things they do. They shouldn't have been doing that link card scheme. No. They shouldn't have been doing that whole thing. But now I can't get a pizza puff.
But this is the thing, though. A lot of these places were shady for a long time.
Yeah.
And the reasons they're getting shut down are not the reasons we need them to get shut down or we need them to get better. If you keep allowing drug dealers inside your... listen, I get it. If I owned a business and I'm having a hard time getting dealers from in front of me, that could be a safety issue because I don't want them to come shoot up the front of my store. I get
and
that.
I was one of the ones complaining about that too.
So you know, I get that. You're trying to have a business and you're like, hey, you can't sell inside here, but there's only so much you can do about the sidewalk in front of your business other than keep calling the police. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But in the same manner, if you're selling 15-year-old hot Cheetos in one apple, I'm not that concerned about you. But I mean, I don't know how to say it. It's not how much of a service is it providing, and I want to be able to get a pizza puff too. From time to time. I'm not even mad about that. But if you're just running a crappy store and then you drive home to Palos or wherever it is that you live, how invested are you in your community? I don't need you to like spend all your money here or worry about, but take care of your business. I remember when that gas station that's on Sacramento and something helped sponsor a block party, and then somebody ended up getting shot.
Over on Fulton. Yeah,
but at least they recognized that they were still trying to make a positive presence in the neighborhood. Where I've seen other stores where are not doing that. But I don't know if you're familiar with Iman, Inner City Muslim Action Network.
I'm not super familiar.
They had a thing called Arab Run. So they were talking to more Arab Run businesses that are in Black and Puerto Rican and Mexican neighborhoods and saying, listen, okay, we have to take a certain amount of responsibility in these neighborhoods. So what we're going to do, they were pushing for fresher items in their stores. That people might come to, if you have items that were apples and oranges and whatever small things that you could offer and better looking stores and cleaner stores. So that's nothing against all Arab stores in Black neighborhoods. Yeah. That's not the case. There's plenty of stores that are doing, I mean, you don't have to sponsor a baseball team, but I need your store to be clean. Yeah. I need you to sweep in front of it. I need you to care. And
that's the thing is I need you to take care of your stuff and then we can be cool. But and that's such a, and it becomes a cyclical thing. I've seen this in renters versus landlords. Landlord doesn't fix anything. You never pay your rent on time. Who's to blame in that situation? You kind of both are. And it becomes a cycle. And, well, I'm not going to keep paying rent if he's not going to fix anything. Well, I'm not going to fix anything if I can't rely on that rent. And it's like, well, somebody's got to step up their game at some point. Right. And that's, I think, to a certain degree, that's where we are in as a community, is who's going to step up to the plate. Because if nobody does, gentrification is just going to come through like a whirlwind. And if you can capitalize on it, if you're a property owner and your property value goes up, great. And if you're a renter.
Yeah, because when I see properties for $500,000 over, I'm like, what? Like, if I was trying to buy in here now, I probably couldn't. I mean, I could buy something that would be a fixer-upper. I mean, there's one thing, I'm looking at places where you could look inside and it's down to the studs. That I'm like, I would buy $250,000 to buy a place that I have to put up drywall? Like that blows my mind, but that's happening but we still don't have what we need here. And so it's that's scary for a lot of people. And I get it. Like you have a neighbor that's coming in and, a lot of new neighbors coming in, and they have these really nice properties and all this kind of stuff and beautiful homes. And yet you don't see any changes, but pretty soon that your rent's going to go up, your taxes are going to go up, and how are you going to be able to afford that?
Yeah. And I do hear a lot of when will these businesses just come in and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, what can we do? Like, like I can't, why on earth would Aldi care about me? Or us? But what can we do? I can't necessarily expect business to come. I mean, I've talked to several people in the neighborhood about opening businesses in different areas, and I mean, because it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so it's like, but what can we do to encourage that, or the things that we want to see? What can we do there? And I feel like that's what the community meetings are supposed to be for. Right.
Instead, they end up being like, or when people who come out, people are scared when it's outside the community. So they're like, these people came from, they don't live here, and they presented. Well, what did you present?
Yeah. If you're going to present something, I would gladly support it. But I don't have any of those options right now.
I will support I try to support anything that's positive in East Garfield Park. I was going to Lake Street Bar. It was a nice little bar, and it wasn't even about the alcohol situation. It was a nice place for us to go to that we felt safe, that was clean. The people who work there live in the neighborhood. I'm here to support that. If you have I support the restaurant right here. I can't believe I can't think
Inspiration
of it.
Kitchen?
Yeah, Inspiration Kitchen. When the hatchery came and the hatchery was flooding the neighborhood with information, everybody's like, wow, they didn't do anything to advertise. Now, I understand everybody's not on social media, but there's signs outside. They were going to different churches in the neighborhood, community centers. So, and then they were like, well, they didn't tell us anything in that sign. Go knock on the door. You go every other place. Yeah. Walk in and say, hey, what's going on here? Because we have so many kind of an artist community here. And the hatchery is doing a lot better with bringing people in with caterers. And, so I'm like, support the hatchery with the small businesses there's a lot of small businesses and caterers and food trucks of people that live here. So you can go order food there, pick it up, and you're supporting people in the neighborhood. So we got to get that too, where we have to be the people that start supporting those local places.
Yeah.
Even though I did buy a Christmas tree at Home Depot this year, but I would always try to go to Adam and Sons on California. Yeah. Or even Christy Weber, because Christy Weber has invested and donated a lot of money to schools in the area. Yeah.
And it just seems like a lot of that stuff, like I think of myself, the reason I don't get into any of that stuff, like I haven't ordered anything from the hatchery, is because it involves work. It involves I have to go and look through some things. And it seems like that's one thing that there's a lot of people that don't want to have to do in their own communities anymore. So I don't want to have to go to them. I don't want to have to find out. I want it all to come to me. But if you're looking for something to do, do what I don't do. Support some of the businesses at the hatchery. Also, Anton. Yeah. Anton Hilton is trying to create this food hall over at the old Wallace's. And he's still looking for investors. If you're local and you're looking for projects to invest in, you can leave a message for me and I can connect you with Anton. He's going to be looking for vendors, ideally local, to sell food in the food hall. I mean, that's a great project. And Anton is very much trying to do things local. I'm trying to get him on here. Anton, if you're watching, set aside some time. But those are some very... we just drew it out for you. These are some options that you can do to help support some of those businesses. Because if they do well at the hatchery, I imagine they would be able to find their own space and kind of grow from there.
What's the restaurant? Creed on Lake Street. That's one you can...
Another one that you can support. Yeah.
Right. And you can. I mean, I can walk or ride my bike there. Or when we were talking about, our goal, our love would be to have a brewery or a tap room. Yeah. Doesn't even need to be a brewery. It could be a tap room in this general area. Does that meet all the needs of the neighborhood? Absolutely not. absolutely not. It meets my needs.
Yes.
But I don't know if it's a need. It meets
Yes.
my wants. But the thing is that even something that small, because if you just look at the 5 breweries and tap rooms that popped up in the off of Fulton, that's further east. It's brought a little buzz over there, and so even if that buzz brings a small grocery store, it brings. I don't know. I'm trying to think of other things that my focus is on grocery stores.
Yeah,
I don't know
grocery store, restaurant. I mean, because we have Creed, but there's not really any sit down places. I mean, Inspiration Kitchen is maybe one.
Yeah, and their hours are kind of wonky.
Yeah. But there's no real sit down places. Like a tap room. Like I get together with a bunch of local guys weekly. If you're interested in getting together for beers, we get together every Wednesday night. Hit me up. And typically we go outside the community. We'll do On Tour or the Black Beetle because they're like the closest things.
Right.
So like having some kind of good beer bar or something like that, I think could be great. I'm working on it. I would like to see the Lakeside Bar turn into something like that.
Right.
But yeah, so I think that there's a lot. What I've been trying to encourage people to do is stay local, even in our conversations. I mean, that's a big reason for this channel is there's so many issues going on around the world, around our country, so many things vying for our attention. But we're always going to be pissed off when things aren't going the way we want in our home.
Right.
So what if we focused our attention a little bit more on those things? Okay, so local. There's a lot of stuff that we don't want. What can we do about that? We can't do anything about whatever trial is in the news right now.
Right.
But we might be able to do something about a local business here.
Right.
And so I'm trying to get everybody to make their worlds a little bit smaller. Because I think that could be helpful. We can help our neighbors.
Very much.
I can donate to fires in California or whatever. I don't know how they're going to use that money, but if I can see how the hatchery is going to use my money, the hatchery's not using any of my money. I don't have much money for them to use, but I can see those results.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's good. I like where you're going with the idea of the solutions. What could be,
or just knowing the people in your neighborhood, like Alia ended up, that's my daughter's name, but she ended up having a friend that lives in the area, and they've lived near each other their whole lives. We didn't meet each other till later. And when us as moms talking, like, how much better would it have been if they had known each other since they were little? Because before, Ollie had all these friends that were outside the neighborhood, not very many here, because she's going to school outside the area. All her, my daughter was a swimmer, so she was in her swim club was at Whitney Young. She was going to school in Lincoln Park, or she was, and she had a swim club at UIC. So if I had been better friends with her when she was younger, like other parents, like once they did become friends, it was awesome, because it's like, you can pick them up from here, I'll pick them up from here. Because when my sister moved out of the neighborhood, I didn't have that that security blanket of that. It was like, man, how much better it would have been to have a network here of people. My daughter went to Suter Montessori up the street, and I noticed that before she went into a regular CPS program, Montessori parents, they're all granola. We all love each other. And I got used to that. So, I got used to, hey, I'll get your kids if you can't. Can you pick mine up? And, when you have that neighborhood or that unit, it also makes it easier. And then you start to learn about each other's small businesses. We had Nikki, who had this summer concert series. And there were people from the neighborhood, but most of the people going to her summer concert series were not from the neighborhood. So you have somebody in the neighborhood. It's, I don't know, it was like $10 or something to go. It's in it, it may not even be music that you like. That's cool. You can look to see what the music is. I made sure my husband went with me on the night that she had a reggae band that I absolutely love.
And your husband is a real person, right?
Yes, yes, he is.
your husband is kind of like my wife. It's like
the figment of imagination.
Everybody hears about him, but
never seen him. But yeah, he actually made an appearance. And and so she had, some of the food that was being cooked was a guy who lives here, and he's a chef. I bought some knickknacks and things from people who live in the neighborhood who did crafts or whatever. and I was able to hear music, and I never left the neighborhood. I literally walked over there.
Yeah.
So when you have just even that was supporting some artists that don't live here and some that do.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
there are some really phenomenal artists that live here.
Lots.
I'm gonna blank on their names. But there's a couple of Mexican musicians that live right here on Walnut Street. Mm-hmm. I'm blanking on their names. I'm sorry, guys. You're gonna hate me for that. I'll put it in the comments when I remember it. But they're phenomenal. They'll play at like the Mexican Museum of Art. They do a lot of traditional Mexican music. I mean, Kelly Reeves is a phenomenal visual artist.
Yeah. Her husband, Andrea Jablonski, who does those beautiful murals.
Yeah.
And then if you've ever been to the to GAG, the garden
apartment, I went there once a few years ago.
And she's had, you know, like during the summer, she's had things where you have one year that taco truck and live bands. It was like music for 2 days.
Yeah.
And it may not be music that you like, but you can still go and support what they're doing. And even like I really miss the blues band. There's a blues band used to set up in the park, and they used to perform at at Lakeside Bar. Mm-hmm. And or the music they have at the Garfield Park Conservatory, which is free to the community. Yeah,
I'm hoping once pandemic kind of blows over, because some of those blues musicians were still practicing at Lakeside just before the pandemic, and I was hoping to, you know, I used to be a musician, so I kind of joined them and even do a big block party with some blues musicians, some hip hop musicians. I used to be in the hip hop scene for a long time, some like salsa, you know. Really diversity of music, because I feel like there's a lot of that in the neighborhood already.
Kuumba Links had their series on Madison this summer, and it was twice a week, and people probably thought it was like they had those decorated shipping containers.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And free things, and granted, the people who started Kuumba Links are friends of mine.
Yeah.
But it was the arts and crafts were a little expensive, but those were artists that spent their time making items. So I was buying soap over there, earrings, whatever. But it was free, and the kids could go in there, and they had poetry and hip hop and dance. They had yoga, and I was hoping that there would be more community buy-in on it. And if there isn't, you know, and people drove by and probably like, what is happening? But also, though, I think sometimes we depend too much on social media, and for those people who are not on social media may not know what's going on over there, but then it's like, well, how else are you going to advertise?
Yeah, that does make it different. Door to door, I don't open the door for those people.
No, and I don't like when people put flyers on my gate.
Exactly.
I see it as fly trash.
So it is the marketing of it is, but I think that's where the building of relationships comes in. Is like, there's a lot of people on my block that don't use social media, but we talk every other day. So, hey, I'm doing this event. Hey, I have this podcast. Hey, you know, so the building of relationships, and I know COVID really hurt that in terms of people getting together and stuff like that. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that this spring people do more of it.
And I have a lot of new neighbors on my block that I see them, but I don't know them, whereas before we would be outside more talking to our neighbors. Like the neighbors I have now that you...
Joel. Yeah.
Well, I know them because my daughter babysits for them.
Okay,
they have
nice.
a gaggle of kids and, you know, whatever. But I know them because they're literally sharing a gate with me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if I wasn't, would I have... would I be talking to them?
Yeah.
You know?
And so, getting to know your community better. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is that we can all get to know each other better and get to know each other, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? We don't think the same way. There's some people like John Perryman, Karen Craig, where we're on like opposing sides of every kind of spectrum you can have. But we'll get together and have a beer, and we'll have a great time. We'll make fun of each other. We're neighbors. We're part of a community. And so anything that we can do to continue fostering that. Right. So thank you for being here. Hopefully we'll get your husband to appear in the maybe we have him wear a mask.
Snuffleupagus.
We can have him wear a mask so that we can still continue this mythology.
We'll pixelate his face.
But again, if you like hearing these conversations, if you live in the community, considering being in the community, please like, share, subscribe, and we'll be doing more of this soon. Thank you again. Thank you. And enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
All right.